Welcome to our second installment in the series, Spiritual and Religious, How Different Faiths Answer the Really Big Questions. My name is Kathrin McHugh. Spiritual and Religious answers the kind of questions that are commonly asked when it comes to matters of faith. Here, we discover some ideas new to us and clarify misunderstandings we may have had about our own faith or about another's. Today's topic is the truth of human suffering. With us to respond to today's questions are Tibetan Buddhist Lama Tsering Ngodup. Tsering has been authorized to teach by H.H. Shamar Rinpoche, the 14th incarnation of the Shamarpa, or Red Hat Lama of Tibet, and a highly accomplished meditation master. Tsering has devoted over 20 years to sharing the religious and spiritual teachings of Tibetan Buddhism in the West. He has traveled across the world, translating and interpreting Buddhist teachings for highly accomplished Tibetan lamas and masters from all four schools of Tibetan Buddhism. Thank you for joining us today, Tsering.
Thank you. I'm very privileged to come here and be among all the respected and honored guests here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Rabbi Daniel Lieben has served as the spiritual leader of Temple Israel of Natick for over 20 years, Metro West's largest conservative synagogue with about 500 families and 1,200 individuals. A vibrant community with a focus on education at every age, Rabbi Lieben maintains involvement with all of the many aspects of temple life and is currently president of the Massachusetts Board of Rabbis. Thank you for being here today, Rabbi.
Pleasure to be back.
Great. Reverend Mark McCone-Sweet is the rector of St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church in Dover. As well as having a rich history serving several of our Massachusetts Episcopal churches and articulating the Christian message, Mark has a passion for mission work and is currently a consultant to parishes forming international mission teams. He is currently vice president of the Massachusetts Episcopal Clergy Association Board. We are happy you are with us here today.
Thank you for having me back.
Great. Reverend Nathan Dietering has served as the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Area Church, First Parish Sherborne, since 2003. His call to ministry came during his time spent as a Peace Corps volunteer in the West Indies in the mid-90s. His church's commitment to community outreach and social justice is well known, and under Nathan's leadership, the UUAC, as it is known, was honored at their National Assembly as a breakthrough congregation, one of 4 congregations out of 660 chosen. Thank you for being here today, Nathan.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Wonderful. So today we are talking about suffering and the truth of human suffering. I'm going to direct the first question towards Tsering, our honored guest. In your experience as a spiritual leader, what are the primary ways, the first ways, in which you respond to someone who comes to you suffering?
From a Buddhist point of view, every suffering or happiness or joy, whatever the experience may be, it is due to one's cause through the karma. The karma is the fundamental law which governs every situation and experience. So the response to the people who come and approach for some kind of solution or advice or just a comfort is basically trying to understand the person's predisposition, whether his or her spiritual understanding is deep or profound, or his or her fear or hope or doubt are. By judging on those things and understanding, then you respond. If they are reacting more out of fear than comforting them, giving a lot of hope and different methods to overcome the fear. After all, whether you are very accomplished in spiritual understanding and realization, or you are just purely a simple, ordinary person, we all go through the basic problems and sufferings of old age, sickness, and death. But how you take the suffering, how you feel it, how you live with that is another thing. So the answers, there is no one answer, like it has to be considered upon the person. Like so-called the skillful means based on some wisdom of understanding the human nature, and then with the knowledge and understanding of the teachings and methods can be given. So I cannot be very specific, but this is a general answer.
Okay, great. Nathan?
Well, again, I'm struck by how many similarities we have at this table, and I guess I would say to the person that comes to me in a place of suffering, that suffering in our tradition is not a punishment for life or because of things that happen in life, but rather it's a part of life. And I guess what I always tell myself is that this is not a time to explain theology or explain God, but rather to experience theology and to experience God. So when someone comes to me asking, why is this happening? I try to shift the question a little bit to, when this happens, what do you do and what do you need and how do you experience love and support? So I think the most important thing that I do as a minister to them is simply open my heart and shut my mouth and open my ears and listen.
That's beautifully said. Opening the heart and being a compassionate listener, modeling a ministry of presence is very important in all of our traditions. And I think one of the key things that we always encounter is that when people are suffering, they're feeling alone. They're feeling isolated from other people who don't know what to do with their illness. They're also feeling isolated from their own body, which has, in some sense, in their perspective, perhaps betrayed them. And so our first obligation, our first impulse from the heart is to help somebody to know that they are not alone. Through us, through the community, the all-important presence of the community, and opening the door for God to be felt in whatever way people understand that, and there's a wide way in which that could be understood. But I see that as my first role is to help a person in pain to understand that they are not alone, even though it's a very lonely experience.
Great. How about you?
I've been reflecting on some of Mother Teresa's writings, and what I love about her is her humility, of course. But what I've always been understood her understanding of suffering is just on that, Daniel, that human suffering has many elements to it. Some of it's a decision by someone else that imposes suffering upon you. Some of it's just nature. Your human body has cancer. Your human body fails you at times. Or relationships cause suffering because they're failing. She argues that the ultimate suffering is loneliness, and therefore I would put the word of shame in there, in a sense of lack of dignity. And so the ministry of presence, that's I try to talk about all the time, is the ministry of presence. The greatest thing we can do for anybody is to be present in their suffering and never abandon them. And that's a challenge, especially for at least my congregation and others I've worked with. Especially in New England, that's a new concept when someone's suffering, to go and sit by their bedside and just be there, not knowing what to say. Or to cook them a meal and just do it and not ask for permission. As that impulse to be present. Because the New England model is, I don't want to burden them, and they need their space and they need their privacy. You see your head's going down, assuming you all might agree with me. My default understanding is, from Mother Teresa and from my own understanding of my faith, is to say, I'm called to be present. And we as a community, we're called to gather around each other, never abandon suffering.
Yes. And from the Buddhist point of view, every teacher or Lama is a spiritual guide. You help the person to guide through his or her journey, and there are several methods how to go through that. So every result that you experience, particularly sufferings of every kind of conditions, are considered and recognized as a ripening of one's own negative karma. And to understand that ripening of karma and manifesting in suffering itself is a process of purification. So accepting that and surrendering that and not feeling bad about it. But of course, pain is pain. But to make oneself to understand that through this experience, one is being purified. And Buddhist teaching emphasizes that only positivity within in the negativity is that it can be purified. So there are, based on the faith and confidence and devotion of the person, the Lama or a teacher as a spiritual guide will help them to go through that, you know. And
Tsering, could you expound for us a little bit of what some of those specific methods would be?
Like, say, for those who are interested in reciting mantra or reciting prayers, there are many different types which are for healing. And then most profound thing is understanding and reflecting and engaging in a meditation to understand and realize the fundamental truth on the nature of the mind. And then for others who are not so sophisticated, like there are many other rituals and ceremonies that in a monastic institute and other different spiritual persons can help them perform, which will give them a comfort and joy of having spiritually healed, even though, of course, there's no guarantee that every effort has success, you know, because every individual has to go through, you know. If the karma is ripened, even if the Buddha is right in front of the person who is dying, he has to die, you know.
Well, I absolutely understand. So tell me, for any of you, is there something that comes up for you in terms of a spiritual practice within your tradition that you have found has been helpful, or a place that you might go to?
Well, I guess one thing that I first want to say is that we walk such a fine line between seeing pain as redemptive or transformative, and on one side, and seeing it as the universe's purpose or God's will. You know, God wanted this to happen. I hear this language all the time. And I personally see a lot of suffering from that suggestion that somehow this is meant to happen, everything happens for a reason, that kind of perspective. And I'm troubled by that because it implies that that there is a capricious God out there that wants us to feel pain. Your emeritus Rabbi Kushner, who I love, and it says so well that God does not protect us, promise us protection, but God promises us presence. And I think a lot about that in the practices that we can offer. So we already talked about the pastoral response that we can offer. And I think that the most important practice, though, is to not turn away from the pain. And I think that can be a redemptive experience. There's a lot of temptations to turn away, to numb it away with substances or with certain kinds of, all kinds of things, just to take the pain away. And I guess I would want to encourage people to see it and to face it, because it can be transformative. Pain and suffering invites us to change something in our lives. And it opens us up to support and love that we otherwise would not see.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's
But it has to be so careful, I think,
purification.
because you hear people say, you know, God wants this to happen, and look at all the good things that come out of this. And I worry about that kind of response in my parishioners that I see.
Yeah. It's not just the brain and the nerves, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, I can't agree with you more, Nathan, about that point very specifically, that the traditional language that we hear so much in many traditions, that it is God's will.
That rhetoric on the
That
radios.
kind of,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
very, very, I guess it comes close to making me angry.
Yes.
Because it's hurtful.
Yeah.
Because it's hurtful. And so I think you're right. The first step is to be present to and to open up compassion, especially since people are often withhold compassion from themselves, even before they'll withhold compassion from another person.
That's true.
So that's the first thing we can do, is to help them find that compassion for themselves. One of the things I'm